I would say the whole posterior chain. So, I mean, if you look at the glutes are going to be on that posterior side. So they're going to stabilize that pelvis. We want to keep the pelvis stabilized so that we can neutralize the spine or keep the spine in a neutral position. Yeah. So if we do not have strong glutes or strong abdominals, basically, or any deep hip flexors, pelvic stabilizers, then we run the risk of getting hurt. So a strong posterior chain is going to be that much more important for performance, both in regards of speed, power, strength, anything along those lines, because it's really that like core center of trying to stabilize the body. So if we can even visualize it kind of as like a gear or gear cog. Mm-hmm. So the glutes are going to be kind of right in that center. And then we have our rib cage that we need to stabilize as well. So stacking the rib cage over the pelvis, that's going to really help to increase intra-abdominal pressure so that we have this good position that we can stabilize, and then we could actually use our hips or our legs to do exercises or do movements, and we can be a lot more spine sparing. So glutes are going to be important. And then on the upper body, the lats. Lats are going to act pretty similar in terms of the glutes. They tie in together through that lumbothoraco-fascia. So that posterior sling, that posterior chain is huge for both injury prevention as well as performance.
Hey friends, welcome back. So in today's show, we're going to explore the latest science and trends when it comes to building muscle, burning fat, and gaining strength with someone that I've personally worked with, a personal trainer and certified strength and conditioning specialist, a CSCS. His name is Dan Stephenson. I've been working with Dan since 2013. He's a friend of mine. He's a very knowledgeable person, and I like to describe Dan as the trainer to trainers. So Dan writes programs for people that are competing at a very high level and who themselves are professionals in the fitness industry, because he's that knowledgeable and that great with his programming and his way of thinking through how to overcome hurdles and obstacles and roadblocks when it comes to inability to burn fat, or challenges when it comes to, say, hard gainers, people that have a hard time putting on muscle or gaining strength. So throughout this conversation, you will learn a ton of nuggets. I'll put links to the key timestamps and show notes. We talk about periodization. That is, how frequently should you be changing your exercise program, the sets, the reps, the core exercises, and how you can add novel stimuli to the exercises that you maybe normally do to have a breakthrough. For example, gaining more strength in your squat or your deadlift, or being able to perform a solid 6 or 7 sets or reps of a pull-up, for example. Dan has some very specific tips throughout this conversation about how to do that using eccentrics, isometrics, pausing. And then we talk about using bands and chains to so-called accommodate resistance, which have been huge in my own personal fitness journey and strength and conditioning journey to help me and prevent injuries as you age. So I think you'll really enjoy this conversation. It's a great one. And today's show is brought to you by Myoscience Nutrition, tools to help optimize your sleep, your micronutrient balance, your energy, and recovery. So something new that you may want to know about is the new suite of gummies, including a new zinc and vitamin D gummy. These are chewable gummies that taste phenomenal. Your kids will enjoy them, and you might like them before bed or in the post-exercise window as a healthier option to, say, cookies or sweets, candy, or even ice cream. I know sometimes at night, especially during the summer, you want something a little bit sweet. Well, why not get something a little bit sweet, less than half a gram of sugar per gummy, that also delivers some key essential micronutrients to support whole body health, like zinc. We know zinc is important for sleep, recovery, for whole body immune health. And we know that vitamin D plays a lot of important roles, including helping to support whole body muscle health and as well as hypertrophy. So you can support your body's micronutrient balance and cover that sweet tooth craving by going over to myoscience.com. That's MYOXCIENCE.com, and check out the new zinc and vitamin D gummies. By the way, these taste phenomenal. In our household, we have to throttle these back a little bit and hide them because they taste that good. But we only use them in the post-exercise window or as a little treat before bed, instead of having some ice cream or some cookies or things like that. So you might want to check them out. You can use the coupon code podcast at checkout. I will put links below. Again, that coupon is podcast over at myoscience.com. That's MYOXCIENCE.com. So let's cut back to it with Dan and talk all things hypertrophy, strength, and fat loss. And hopefully you'll learn some novel tips as I did throughout this conversation. So here we go. We got Rainer the dog with us to bug us this whole time, Dan. But Dan, it's super great to have you back on. We did a podcast it was 7 years ago. It was right when I first started the show in 2014. So it's good to have you on, and just to set the stage for everyone. So I've known you and I've been trained by you as a client. for like 6-7 years, something like that. And pre-COVID, we had this, you set up this really cool thing called Power Hour, which was amazing. And that's one of the reasons why I was so upset that the gym's closed, because that, like, let's talk about that. Like, so it was every Wednesday morning, we met at 7:30, right? And
yeah, for 90-minute class. And it was just a killer environment. I mean, the community of just everybody working on their strength. So, I mean, it was generally powerlifting centric, but like you didn't necessarily have to compete or anything like that. So it was just a good group of individuals coming together to train, which was awesome. Yeah, I really miss that. That's probably the thing I miss the most about being in person.
Right.
For training, primarily is doing the groups like that.
The camaraderie.
Yeah.
You know, that's the thing, because a lot of people are working out at home, which is cool. It's like everyone bought a bunch of fitness gear or whatever, which is great. But, you know, you don't get pushed like that. It's so easy. I don't know. I wanted to kind of pick your brain on this, because you train at a high level in a long time, probably arguably one of the stronger people in the gym and so forth. And then you're at home. There's always something to do in your house, right? You could clean, you got emails to do. It's so easy to just kind of peel it back a little bit, right?
For sure. Yeah, it's difficult. I mean, yeah, you can multitask a little bit, and sometimes with strength training, the rest periods, it's like, okay, yeah, I got enough time to change the laundry over.
Right.
Ironically, though, I would also say on the flip side, working in a gym, being in your own garage training, for me, like, I don't necessarily get interrupted as much, right? Yes, it's me interrupting myself to go do a task potentially, but I don't have members, coworkers, clients potentially coming up and asking, that kind of thing, which, you know, I love that. Yeah. I love the community. It's great, but that is one, like, kind of double-edged sword too, where it's like, it's kind of nice because I could just put my head down and do the work.
Right.
But at the same time, that community aspect is gone. And when you're by yourself, it's like, yeah, maybe I'll do this in between. If I'm not super motivated, I end up mowing the lawn or something instead of finishing my workout. Or
It's funny. I do that all the time too, which is kind of nice, right? Like you said, especially if you're going heavy, you have a longer rest set and you can sort of multitask. But yeah, I do miss a community aspect of it. And I wonder how much that has affected people's mental health. I mean, we see depression and all these things, suicides, overdoses. Obviously, without mentioning names in your clients, you know, that you've worked with, have you found people's mental health took a dip, or did you know, some people just took it as an advantage to improve themselves, right, as well?
Yeah.
So it went both ways.
For sure. Yeah, I've had clients that have done both, you know, some that have really taken ownership of all the variables that they can now control that much better. So like their nutrition, going out on walks, really just staying active and prioritizing their time for actually taking care of themselves. Then also the flip side, to where, you know, maybe very extroverted people, they don't have the same community, and that can really harp on them. You know, they're starting to gain weight, they're starting to eat poorly because of what they have at home versus maybe might have made better choices when they're eating in the cafeteria. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it's definitely been a mix, you know, a bit of both. So I think it really depends on the person, like the personality, and then also how do they take ownership or lack thereof of their own health during that time, for sure.
Such a great point. Yeah, you got to know yourself, right? Know your personality. Are you introvert, extrovert? Do you get charged by other people or not? I'm kind of in between. I like personal time, but I also miss that community aspect of it as well.
Yeah.
Which was why, you know, doing those group training sessions were great. And also from a business standpoint for you, you're able to work with multiple people at once. So that's like got to be a major plus, you know, from a trainer. So any trainers listening, I mean, that's got to be the way to do it.
Yeah, certainly. If we start to get back to that, I think that is one way. For one, I feel it's more fulfilling. I mean, I love one-on-one. I don't think that will ever go away. But if you can get that like small group mentality or that group going, the competitive drive that you get within the group is just fantastic. And then, yeah, from a financial perspective, it just makes that much more sense if you can manage that within your gym or within your business, for sure.
But then what was cool, and I want to get into the programming of it and kind of build up to it, but what was neat is you could spend so much more time because every workout was so unique and different. And like the warm-up, the conditioning, like, you know, because you're like, okay, I got 8 people, I want it to be novel, unique, and it was always something new. It wasn't like, oh my gosh, here we go, we're going to do that. You know, it was like, okay, we could do box squats, we could do jumping, we could do bands, we could pot, you know, there was like always something new. And that novelty is pretty cool. And that's why I think, you know, a lot of people are like, look, I just do my kettlebell swings, I go for a walk. I hear these comments, you know, and I'm like, okay, that's good. That's a great step in the right direction. However, periodization is important for your fitness. So if someone hasn't heard the word periodization, how would you define that?
So periodization in a nutshell, I would say, is an organized structure to your program. So if you look at it in terms of like athletics, it's usually a program designed to peak you for a certain season or for a certain date or competition. So it's manipulating variables within your program, whether it be sets, reps, exercises, the rest periods, the frequency of that you're training, or even the outline of what you're training or the focus on what you're training. So that's kind of the general guideline of what it is when it comes down to just like general population, or kind of simplifying it. It's basically what kind of organized structure do you put or apply to your training?
Which is great. And so the big question for a lot of people is how frequently do you change all that up, right? So, you know, some of the bodybuilding books that I read, and you know, I did the ACE and NASM personal trainer certification a long time ago, and it was like, okay, you don't want to switch it up every workout, like every couple weeks. Where is the science sort of standing right now? Like for general population, people that want to put on muscle, lose weight. I think there are some benefits to, this is just my bias coming in just through experience, maybe not changing it up every week, maybe tweaking some aspects of it, but what does the science show for like hypertrophy and strength? Like how often should you be switching up those reps and sets and rest periods?
So it really comes down to principles. So when we look at exercise, basically your workout, it should achieve a few things. So if you have a specific goal, the SAID principle, specific adaptations to impose demands, that needs to be in some regard respected. So if your goal is to power lift, for example, there should be some form of a squat, a bench press, or a deadlift. Now that can vary. The level of specificity can also vary from the type of exercise, how it's performed, the repetitions, like the intensity. So say, for example, what we did in Power Hour is we often did a heavy lift, which was within about 1 to 5 reps, that somewhat resembled a squat, bench press, or deadlift. So it might have been slightly varied, but the set or rep intensity was very similar. So it still respected that specificity in terms of pushing a heavy weight within a pretty close movement pattern, and then having that variability in terms of like what variation we did. So sometimes we squatted with bands, sometimes we pressed with bands, sometimes we used chains, sometimes we did the squatting to a box versus a free squat. If we had more bars, we could even change the bar out, but we're still looking at chasing the specific stimulus to get stronger. So when you look at a program, I think the variability, you don't want to change everything, right? Because then you're just basically throwing a bunch of darts at the wall and hoping some of them stick. So what you want to do is think about what your goal is. So if you're looking for fat loss, some variety is actually pretty efficient because you're inefficient when you do change things up. So you actually end up burning more calories because you're not necessarily being efficient with your movement. So I know that sounds a little bit counterintuitive, but like changing the modality might actually help you to be less efficient. So I think a good example of this is actually if you remember the first time that you like went snowboarding.
Yeah, you're using so many more muscles. It's hard as hell. Yeah.
Right? Or something like that, some activity, riding a bike, right? So it takes a little bit for that motor learning or that motor efficiency. And when you get good at that, you actually are more efficient and you burn less calories. So fat loss can actually be a goal of maybe doing some variety to where you actually do want to be a little inefficient. If we look hypertrophy, we also got to respect like the overload principle. So that goes for strength as well. So if we look at the overload principle, that usually means doing more weight than what you've done previously. But the weight can also be volume, right? So it's weight lifted over time, or weight lifted in the total session. Weight lifted over time is actually work density. So we can look at improving the work density. Basically, you got to do more than what you did previously, so you actually have a stimulus to adapt from.
Gotcha.
So hypertrophy can be pretty specific for a while, like different periodization styles. So you go with like a block periodization to where you're going to stick with like the same exercises for maybe a month. And then you progress within like that general hypertrophy range of like an 8 to 12 repetitions. And you're trying to just lift a little bit more, maybe with another set, or maybe getting one more rep at that same weight, or maybe adding 5 to 10 pounds to each lift within that month. And then if you continue to do so, then we look at the gas principle, which is you're general adaptation syndrome, you could potentially run into maladaptation. So if you start to do things a little bit too much, or if we could linearly progress, like
as humans, yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah, right. There'd be so many 1,000-pound squats, so many 1,000-pound curls.
Right.
I mean, think about how frequently some people do those exercises, right? So it needs to be varied in some regard. So usually about a month, 4 to 6 weeks is a good amount of time where it's like, okay, if I'm not changing much and I'm working within this rep range, maybe it's time that I change either the exercises, change the rep range of focus, or have some kind of variation within that so that we do not stale out and start to get maladaptation, potentially risking injury. So that's one thing to watch out for with the variation.
So if you're not improving, time to switch it up a little bit.
Yeah, right. So you're going to start to see some improvements, maybe not in the first like 1 to 2 weeks as you start to get good or start to get more familiar with these, more efficient. You might see some improvement within weeks 3 to 4, for example. And then maybe in that 5 to 6, it starts to kind of peter off a little bit. So like that might be an opportunity for, okay, maybe we change things up a little bit, change the stimulus, or give yourself a little bit of a different stimulus to adapt to. So whether it be different exercises or maybe going for a strength block following hypertrophy. So if hypertrophy, we're building the muscles, then strength, we're basically asking that muscle that we built to then express more force. So like that's a simple periodization scheme right there. Just that's hypertrophy, awesome. Strength, and then maybe peak, or maybe we just go through like a transition period to where we're working more on fat loss or conditioning in that regard.
Such a great point. I hope people can sort of visualize how you're parsing that out, because that's a great way to sort of think about this. And I want to pick apart a few different aspects, but because a lot of people are focused on fat loss, right? And that's the thing. They want to lose weight. It's summer as they watch this or listen to this, and thanks for being here, guys. So people want to lose weight. And so they're always doing these novel, and I think CrossFit, and I'm not picking on CrossFit, but they get a workout of the day, or they do whatever. And so they're always doing some new stuff, right? And it's just more about kind of burning calories, which is fine, but I don't see a lot of people, and I'm not picking on anyone. There's some people that have really lost a lot of weight, but I see a lot of people do that and their physique doesn't really change, or sometimes they don't really get stronger. They're just going through the motions of burning, focus on energy or calorie expenditure. And so like you were talking about this general adaptation, the GAD, was it?
Gas.
Yeah. So it's not specific in the sense, like there's nothing really specific that they're training except for, they're expending energy, which is good, but that specificity is nice.
Yeah, for sure. So when you look at something like if we stay in one phase for too long, we often neglect maybe what might make us better, right? So strength is probably the king in terms of improving any other physical quality. Whether it be your conditioning, your output, hypertrophy even, right? So if we can have a bigger maximal output than your operational output, maybe, so what I mean by that is, okay, so if we can squat 500 pounds, for example, and then we go into a CrossFit workout to where we have to squat 225. Well, say if I could only squat 275, 225 becomes a very significant stimulus that I'm not going to do very good in that workout, right? So if we can take some time to maybe bring up our weaknesses and actually bring up literally our strength, then the output that we're maybe going through on these CrossFit or mixed style training workouts is going to be that much lower that we can actually survive a little bit better, right? So taking the time to actually focus on your strength or maybe what you might be lacking in leaps and bounds, you'll start to perform better when we look at maybe, if that is your goal, performing better in those workouts. Now, one thing with CrossFit is it has created a lot of great physiques too, right? So there's that intensity that really comes along with it, that constant variation, that constant high stimulus, for sure, that works. But one thing that a lot of people run into is that's how they work out all the time. So
they get injured.
Yeah, there's potential for injury, and then also just the amount of non-recover, your workout's harder to recover from if you're always running at that redlining, right? So if you have maybe a high-low type system to where, okay, we're going hard on this workout, the next workout we're going to take it a little bit easier. You're going to be probably more likely to be better recovered the next time you do go hard and perform at a higher level. So that is one thing that you see is they kind of burn out, and then they will get almost, if you watch some lifters or like people that participate in like CrossFit workouts, they get really good at hitting their pace and coasting, right? So they're kind of running that like that coasting pace throughout. So they don't really end up improving at their performance. So like if they were maybe a little bit more recovered, say if they did that, what they call like a Metcon or like the more the CrossFit style workout to where it's more like intensity based, points driven, the very competitive atmosphere. If they could push that hard and then maybe do the next workout or two, maybe a little bit more of traditional, building on their strengths, building on their weaknesses, whatever it may be, then when they come back to that kind of competition or that Metcon style, like they might actually find that they can push a little bit harder or faster. Just an idea with that, as opposed to always running into redline and just trying to survive those workouts, right? You want to thrive in those.
It's a good point. And like you said, I mean, that's a great way to sort of look at it. When you build your strength, you can do more work if it is a higher volume type situation, right? Whether it's a bodybuilding hypertrophy style workout or whatever. And that's one of the things that I wish I would have. So I started working out when I was like 14. You know, we did bench press in our garage and all that. And then, like a lot of people, you probably did this too. You read Muscle and Fitness or Flex magazine. So a lot of people come from this bodybuilding, kind of the older people now, older millennials come from this bodybuilding, era. But I wish I would have started powerlifting earlier, because I didn't really. I would sort of self-injure myself, because you keep doing, 5x5 or 6x6, or then 1 week you might throw in, 8, 3 or 4 sets of 8, whatever. But the powerlifting was pretty cool, where you're not doing as much volume, but you're focusing more on that one or top 3. And so I just wish that's the goal of one of my goals in helping people in their process by listening to this podcast today with you, Dan, is look at getting into powerlifting, if nothing else, just to have more tools in your tool bag so that you can periodize your workouts, so that you don't get stuck doing the same thing, all the time. And so that was really cool. Plus, powerlifting, you focus a lot on the glutes, and there's so much good research on lower body leg strength, especially for women as they age, and the insulin receptors, leptin receptors, and all of this. So that's cool. So how, maybe at the end we can talk about like how people can get into it, but why are the glutes like such a fundamental training facet to powerlifting?
Yeah, no, that's great. So I would say the whole posterior chain. So, I mean, if you look at the glutes, they're going to be a very central part of the body, right? So we have at the core, we're looking at basically the hips. So the glutes are going to be on that posterior side. So they're going to stabilize that pelvis. And then with that, so we want to keep the pelvis stabilized so that we can neutralize the spine, or keep the spine in a neutral position. So if we do not have strong glutes or strong abdominals, basically, or any deep hip flexors, pelvic stabilizers, then we run the risk of getting hurt. So a strong posterior chain is going to be that much more important for performance, both in regards of speed, power, strength, anything along those lines, because it's really that like core center of trying to stabilize the body. So if we can even visualize it kind of as like a gear or gear cog. So the glutes are going to be kind of right in that center. And then we have our rib cage that we need to stabilize as well. So stacking the rib cage over the pelvis, that's going to really help to increase intra-abdominal pressure, so that we have this good position that we can stabilize. And then we could actually use our hips or our legs to do exercises or do movements, and we can be a lot more spine sparing. So glutes are going to be important. And then on the upper body, the lats. Lats are going to act pretty similar in terms of the glutes. They tie in together through that lumbothoraco-fascia. So that posterior sling, that posterior chain is huge for both injury prevention as well as performance. For sure.
And also just everyday movements. I mean, if you're not bracing properly or firing your glutes, picking something up. I mean, so many people will say, I was stressed out, I was tired, I bent over. I have so many friends in the last year, and I just did something wrong and I locked up my back. But I know they don't do hip hinges. I know they don't do reverse hypers. They don't do anything for their glutes, right? These are friends of mine who bench and curl, and they do some of the traditional type stuff. And because, when you see, unless someone has done powerlifting or they follow Brett Contreras, they don't know about the importance of their glutes, right? Like
Certainly.
I front squatted, and that was it. Like I would maybe do a deadlift, but I was always worried about my form until I met you. And then it was like, there was all this posterior chain. Now, where does this go down to the hamstring? So we're talking about your whole backside, basically.
Yeah, basically. So what you'll see, a good example of this is actually what we call like a Instagram booty, or just a resting posture of having this like pelvic tilt. Mm-hmm. So you'll see this with like what's called like anterior pelvic tilt. So if you think of your pelvis as like a bowl and it's spilling forward, that can often, a lot of people think that it's because their hamstrings are tight, when in fact, reality, it might be that their hamstrings are weak. So the hamstrings also help to stabilize that pelvis. So with the glutes, with the anterior core. So when you look at that, yeah, that whole posterior chain, calves, hamstrings, glutes, all the way up to the lats, even down to like the tricep. When we get in through the elbow, for sure. Like all of that's important.
Interesting.
Yeah.
A lot of people neglect that. They're afraid to do pull-ups. We can get into variations. I have my bands here. I want to get into all that, nice. Chains and bands and accommodating resistance. I mean, there's so much to unpack, with this, but, I do want to just mention it, and we'll talk about it at the end. You do programming for people, which is really cool. So I'll put links below, and I just want to give you a plug so people know kind of where you come from and so forth. You are the guy that personal trainers come to for their own programming. You train so many personal trainers and program for them because they like how you program, which is great, Dan. But getting back to the posterior chain, highly underrated, highly neglected. I think
for sure
in most sort of gyms, 24-hour fitness, LA Fitness, not picking on them, but maybe you might see people do some reverse hypers, I'm sorry, back extensions. There's no reverse hypers generally in those gyms, and they might lunge or a step up. Like that's pretty much right for the most part. Maybe you might see people with deadlift, but
lunge might be pushing it, but
why are we so focused on benching and abs?
I think, as vain as it may sound, it's the mirror muscles, right? So we get a lot of focus on that when we're not necessarily following a structured program. It's like, what can I see? Yeah. I can see my shoulders. I can see my pecs. I can work on my abs. I can work on my quads. Like that's what you see because you get that visual feedback looking in the mirror. It's like, who doesn't like to get pumped and look bigger or feel that much better? Right. So there's not a lot of people that chase that posterior chain pump, getting the pump in the lats and pump in the glutes. Like it just isn't quite as satisfying, I feel, for most people. So we look at the anterior muscles, like the mirror muscles is what we call them in the industry. So I think that's a big part why.
That makes sense. And then you can easily, and everyone else is doing that. So you kind of think, oh, well, that's maybe what I should be doing. You don't see, especially men, unless you're in a specialized gym, hitting their glutes.
Yeah, I would say too, if you look at a lot of the gyms that are set up, the big box gyms, what do they have? Maybe one squat rack and like 10 bench presses. And then a bunch of machines that are also mostly anterior focus. So it's like leg presses, shoulder presses, maybe some lat pull downs in there, which is great. But a lot of machines that are primarily focused on pressing or pressing with the lower body, which is like squatting. So that kind of drives that much more to it. So you have somebody that's new to the gym, they walk in, what do they see? Oh, there's a lot of bench presses. Maybe I should learn how to bench press. Like there's not a lot that's driving them to that in a lot of the big box gyms. Right. Now there has been a lot of different styles of gyms that have popped up, which are a little bit more specialty in nature, to where it can be a little bit more reverse, right? It's just a bunch of squat racks, looks like a strength and conditioning center. And that's great. It's, so we start to see that where it's a little bit more of that functional foundational movements, focusing on those patterns rather than just sitting on the machine. I'll let the machine tell me what to do, and I'll just do the whole line of the pressing machines. Now I'm tired. I'm going to go home.
Have a protein shake on the way out.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
And I'm good. So maybe we can thank CrossFit now. It's a good time because do you think if CrossFit never happened, would we see this resurgence in powerlifting and then also gyms, like you said, who are focusing on more strength? Do you think that would have happened?
I think we should definitely be thanking CrossFit for that. I think it's brought a lot of people to that. There's definitely been, it's been there, right? But it's been more on the underground for sure.
Fringy, West Side Barbell type stuff.
For sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think even within the sport of powerlifting, I think that has been a big driver in terms of increasing the raw versus geared. So in powerlifting, there's this, it used to just be geared powerlifting. There was no such thing as raw, which that means you're wearing these like denim or very like thick singlets or suits that assist with the lift. So a lot of people that aren't necessarily already in that sport look at that and just like they can't relate to it.
Like, I'm not going to put that on.
Yeah, right. And it's just like, wow, that's crazy. Like that person squatting over 1,000 pounds, like, oh, I'll never do that or something like that. So you start to see this resurgence or this growth of raw lifting where it's like, okay, that's really cool. This person's doing this, you know, with maybe a belt or like knee sleeves, that kind of thing. So it's brought a lot of people, I think, to that and actually increased tremendously the numbers of people competing in raw powerlifting. It's actually a thing now and they separate them out.
Wow.
So yeah, I think that, and then also just the style of gym that's been built. So the community aspect of CrossFit has been huge, right? So we see a lot of those styles of gyms, whether it's CrossFit style training or even small group training now, to where like that's, I think, realizing from a business standpoint, it's smart. So you get a lot more people in there, hopefully with intelligent programming, with good coaching, and they pay a little bit less, but the gym starts to make a little bit more because of volume. So you kind of run that through, and there's the machine cost is much less, right? The equipment cost. So some of those like machines that we were talking about, a commercial grade shoulder press might be like $5,000 when you can get 4 racks for that same price. So you start to look at that as like, it's really shifted, I think, the environment for gyms even, you know, and how they view their business.
No, it's awesome. I mean, since you introduced me to powerlifting and I started, and I'm by no means like super strong or anything like that. I'm not trying to say that. But when I used to travel a lot, I would seek out the powerlifting gyms. And often it was like, hey, $15 cash, which was way cheaper than like 24-hour fitness. Like, oh yeah, well, it's $30. You got to fill out a waiver. You got to do a tour. You got to do that. And it was like, it's just cash. It was pretty cool. So that's just a tip for people traveling. You know, if you want some place to work out, search out a strength and conditioning or powerlifting gym. I've found some really cool, oftentimes there's like, they have chains, they have bands, they have a reverse hyper, they have all sorts of cool equipment. There was one in Reno, Nevada I went to, one in Salt Lake City, a really, really cool gym, one in Chicago, like they're everywhere. It was really cool to see. So yeah, they got cool music going and all that. But a few other kind of things that I think people struggle with, you know, a lot of people want to do pull-ups and they're like, I just suck at pull-ups. And I was one of these people, and the only way I got better was just practice with time. And you taught me something, and that's using bands to assist the movement instead of, like you said, lat pulls are good, but if you want to get better at pull-ups, you got to do the pull-ups, right? Yeah. So, you know, there was this one machine that was airlifted. I can't remember what it was called.
Gravitron.
Yeah, that one, right? Where you put in the numbers and how much assistance. But now with the bands, I think these are great, you know, just helping. Can you talk about like how someone might go about improving their pull-up strength with bands?
Sure. Yeah. So I do think to a certain level, like the lat pull down might be appropriate enough, right? So if we look at somebody that's, you know, maybe the relative, basically if they're overweight to the point where like a pull-up might be a little bit out of reach currently. So, I mean, there is a time and place for machines, including cables like lat pull downs. Absolutely. That can help you build the muscles while you focus on maybe getting more of a better relative body weight for your strength. So that is one thing you got to consider is where they're at currently in terms of their body weight. So bands are a great way to offload and assist that bottom portion. So it's kind of interesting, actually. So you look at, like, bands are going to be a form of accommodating resistance. So what that means is it's going to change the strength curve of the exercise. So when you look at bands with pull-ups versus bands versus a press, they actually have opposite strength curves. So if you have an ascending strength curve, that's going to be more like a squat or a press, to where when you're fully extended, the weight is actually, or it's easier per se. So on a pull-up, it's actually reversed from that. It's a descending strength curve. So it will help, but it's going to help a little bit more on accelerating you out of the bottom in that reverse band fashion where you're assisting for the pull-up. But when you look at resisting with bands, it kind of gets exponentially harder in the harder part of the lift for any kind of pull. So it's kind of an interesting thing when you look at applying bands or chains, another form of accommodating resistance to certain exercises, is kind of realizing what the strength curve is of that exercise and how that's going to affect that strength curve. So getting back to your question on how to improve pull-ups, I do think bands are a great way to do that because it does help basically offload at the bottom so you can get a little bit more acceleration and it lets up at the top to where hopefully you're pulling through, you change that sticking point, maybe you get a little bit higher than what you would with either a lesser band or no band at all, and that you could hopefully finish the rep. So you're getting that motor patterning at a lesser body weight per se with the band assistance, and then you can work on lessening the band tension until hopefully you're doing body weight only. Often that's not enough though. I would also recommend doing isometrics as well as eccentrics. So we're stronger eccentrically, which is when the muscle lengthens, and we're strong isometrically as well. So concentric is when the muscle shortens. So that's going to be the actual fact of what we think of when we think of a pull-up. So that's getting my chest or my chin to the bar. Eccentrically would be the lowering portion. So if I start, maybe I jump up to it, I have my chest to the bar, and I slowly lower myself down. I'm going to be more successful developing the eccentric strength first than I would be concentrically. So that's one way where you can start to kind of build the pattern in addition to band assisted, maybe at different rotations throughout the week. So if we look at each time you train the pull-up, if you're trying to get to a bodyweight pull-up, one day might be with a band assisted and you're going through the full range of motion, but slightly offloaded. Day 2, probably not the next day after, but the next time you train it, could be eccentric only, to where we jump up or maybe have a box that we kind of step off and then we're completely lowering ourselves down with the full body weight. And then day 3, or maybe a progression period as well, could be isometric, to where we're just focusing on hanging at that top position for as long as possible. So training those 3 I found to be pretty helpful in terms of improving pull-up strength, and then also training just generally your back muscles, both through the horizontal and vertical planes of motion. So rowing will also help your pull-up, right? So rowing in a horizontal plane, just building up that musculature will generally help your pull-ups as well, rather than just doing the specific act of vertically pulling.
Man, that's awesome. People are going to hit the rewind button. That's great. I found out isometric. I mean, I've heard of isometric and used it and all that, but I didn't really find the utility of it personally until I injured my bicep tendon, which was stupid how I injured it. But I couldn't do pull-ups, so I would just sit there and do it like at a 45-degree angle. So it was enough lat and enough bicep that it was like really reparative for the bicep, just that isometric contraction. And I could still stave off like atrophy, disuse atrophy by doing the isometric, but yet it didn't aggravate it to the point of injury. So yeah, I think it's under-recognized. It's not utilized, right?
Oh man. Yeah. Isometrics, for sure. Like they've been shown in research to have a pain relieving effect. So anesthesic effect. So even just the yielding isometric, right? So when you're trying to just hold that position, you're not getting that same kind of shearing force or that movement. And that can actually be restorative in nature, versus going through like the full range of motion. Wow. So for sure, like isometrics are very much underutilized. They get scrutinized because they're very specific in where they build strength. So depending on how you use them, like you want to make sure that you're changing the angles or the positions that you're doing the isometrics in. So for example, say on a bench press, if we're going to use an isometric and we want to build up our strength with isometrics. So there's 2 primary forms of isometrics. We have the yielding, to where I'm going to basically be holding the weight. So say if I go midway down and I just hold it there for a period of time before either completing the full rep or having somebody take it, or there's overcoming, to where that's going to be me pushing the bar into an immovable object, such as like the safety pins. So that your intent is to try to break through an immovable object. So both are very powerful and both have been shown to increase strength, but only with about 5 to 10 degrees of that joint range of motion or that joint angle range of motion. So with that, you got to consider where you're doing the isometric action at. So if we're always pausing in that same section, that could be fine. We just got to recognize like where is the sticking point, because if we're always above it, we're never going to improve that area of that where we're weakest. Right. So for those that don't know what a sticking point is, that's going to be where the bar or the movement slows down the most, because you, for some reason, are weakest in that point of the range of motion. So we want to go either at or just before it when you're doing some of those isometric actions, but very underutilized. One of my favorite methods to use. I'm huge on tempo. I think tempo is a great way to build a lot of strength, build a lot of mind-muscle connection, improve movement, prepare tissues for greater loading to come. So both eccentric, like slow lowering, and then pausing to where you're weakest, or maybe just before where you're weakest, so that we can really build a lot of that strength before going heavy.
That's such a great tip. I mean, a lot of people don't even think about that. They just kind of do the same old, they go, it's 1 rep, 2 reps. I got to get the reps. They don't focus on the time that does it take in the eccentric or concentric fashion. The biggest thing that improved my squat early on, and not that I have a big squat at all, but pausing at the bottom. So doing a squat with just low weight, like the 135, and just sitting there. I remember the first time I did that, my glutes were sore for like a week. I was like, dude, man, this is what I've been missing out on. Like, you learn to like fire different muscles. But going back to the different phases of the isometrics you were talking about, one of the things I remember you really, before COVID hit, for deadlifts, doing them in the rack, and it was like, it was pause. Right? You have you're under the rack there. You were really excited about that. What was up with that?
Yeah, so I think they're huge from that aspect of. So that would be the overcoming isometric. So what we did is we would take the bar and take it under the J hooks to where it was stable, and then pull against those J hooks to where you're not going to break through the J hooks, right? Or at least nobody in our group did, thankfully. Rogue's got some quality equipment.
Yeah, right.
But anyway, in doing that, for one, it allowed me as a coach to coach the movement. So often, like you said, with the squat, right? So pausing in the squat was very beneficial for you. Often people will just power through where they're weak. So they rely a little bit more on the elastic properties of the muscle and tendon, or muscular tendon system, versus maybe like owning the actual position. So the isometric is a great way to slow people down, both for coaching the technique. So I could coach the intention. So if somebody's in that bottom or maybe mid-range position of a deadlift, maybe right around their sticking point, or that bar's around their knees, like you could coach the intention of trying to drive from the hips rather than picking the bar up with the back. So that was a huge thing too. Also for that, we used it in warm-ups to really potentiate the strength at that point. So we did deadlifts later in that workout. So that was just potentiating strength right around that same kind of sticking point for most people in the class. So I think it's a great way to capitalize on a warm-up, do something that has some kind of maximal intent, whether it be isometric or something fast, explosive, or twitchy. Sometimes a combination of both, really, too. So we would do that, and then maybe go to a jump or a ball slam or something like that, to where it's a similar movement pattern, but we're moving fast, moving twitchy. So we're potentiating a lot of type 2 muscle fibers, recruiting bigger motor units that way. So when we actually get into our main lift, or our KPI of the day, the key performance indicator, we're that much more prepared. We can just hammer right through that.
That's awesome. One of the things I learned from you from powerlifting is it the Golgi tendon? Is that for max output?
Yeah. So if you think about maybe the first time that you've lifted weights, or maybe if you are going to lift weights and you're listening to this, what you'll notice is when you fail, you just kind of fail, right? So it almost feels like you can't do anything, and the bar just wants to drop, or the weight just wants to drop. So your body is it's freaking out a little bit, right? So you're throwing in this stress, which is good. We want some stress to adapt to. So we have this stressor, which is, hey, I'm strength training, and this is pushing my limits to the point where, okay, I feel like I need to stop moving before something happens, like an injury. Realistically, you're going to be fine. Your body is just very sensitive to that threat, because it is a threat, especially if you're thinking like a bench press, this could drop on me. Ironically, you actually do kind of shut off and it does drop on you. So make sure that you do have a spotter or at least some spotting arms if you're pushing reps to failure like that. The more that you train, the more that we start to desensitize that Golgi tendon organ. So what that does is it's basically part of your nervous system to where it's going to give you feedback and inhibit the muscle from producing force in order to protect it. So it doesn't rip off the bone, that kind of thing. So the more that we start to strength train, the more it starts to feel, okay, I'm used to this stimulus. I'm more comfortable here. I can actually start to grind through and maybe complete the rep versus having my body say, hey, stop, let the spotters take it. You're done. So it is kind of crazy that you do desensitize that GTO or that Golgi tendon organ to actually get better. But it is awesome. Yeah, it's a factor of strength training. So
it's super neat. And I just want to kind of pause and just drill down just a little bit because there's a lot of people that could push it harder, but they don't. And that's why it's nice working with a coach, someone like yourself who can motivate them. Like, hey, look, Sally, we've been doing this now 8 weeks, and you're at the same weight, and they feel like, oh, maybe it's like psychological or emotional. Like I don't want to get too big, or if I do this, I'll look too manly. Maybe there's some of that going on, but I think a lot of people just don't push through, because it hurts, it's uncomfortable. But the reason why I'm unpacking this is I kind of had a breakthrough, with you, had a low back. I've had this low back injury since I was like 20. And I was I knew I could squat a little bit more, but I would always wuss out. And you were like, Mike, look, I saw you struggling there. Just struggle through it. You got another set. And I was like, oh yeah, I would automatically do that with any chest related exercise, any back. I would just always push through. But then when it was like, deadlift or squatting, I'd always kind of be a wuss, right? And you were like, dude, you got that. If you struggle, it's fine. And I was like, oh yeah, I haven't been letting myself just sit there and struggle. I do that with bench all the time. Like I'll take 120s, I'm sitting there like this and they drop. It's like whatever. But when it came to, and so I just want to emphasize the importance of, obviously not every workout you don't want to do that, but periodically push it, man. If you fail, you fail. Like have a spotter, whatever.
For sure. And a lot of that comes from, having an environment that's suited for that. So like you said, have a spotter, have spotting tiers in place, maybe even practice failing. So you actually don't view it as much of a threat. I wouldn't practice failing with a lot of weight per se, but maybe with like a really light weight and just make sure that the spotting tiers are there and that you know how to get out from under the bar. Say if you're squatting, deadlifting is a little bit easier because you could just drop the bar. With some of those though, it's not too often that we want to push it to actual failure, but understanding where your limits are very important because like you were saying, sometimes you don't necessarily get to the point where you're actually exploring this range that you have plenty of strength in, but your mind kind of overtakes you, right? To where it's like, no, I don't push these, right? So it's not always smart to just fail in your workouts, but maybe having a section to where, okay, I have spotters today. I have somebody that I trust that's behind me. They're ready to pick me up if I need some help. I'm going to finish this, whether it's by myself or with assistance. So getting comfortable grinding for sure, I think can pay dividends in terms of really pushing your limits. The mental game is huge, especially when you start to get into, powerlifting with the bigger weights. It's like, even with the spotter, this weight could still kill me.
Yeah, right.
So that is one thing that's, it can be intimidating for sure. And working on your mental game is huge if you really want to progress and lift bigger weights. So a lot of visualization, mental reps of you completing the rep at that weight or maybe even heavier are going to pay dividends when you actually come to that weight in the gym in real life. So having that to where you don't have doubt, you don't have fear when you come to that weight because you've done it 1,000 times in your mind, and hopefully you're following a plan where you're not just, I've done 600 1,000 times in my mind, but really I've only done 405, so I'm going to jump under it. Yeah. No, be reasonable, but when you're starting to push those limits, visualization is huge. Having the proper mindset for sure.
That's key. So that's one of the sort of issues that powerlifters deal with when they get to a heavy squat. Obviously it makes sense. Like, yeah, you're actually worried that can hold you back. The fear.
Oh, for sure.
That this weight might crush you.
For sure. I could say that's something personally that I struggle with sometimes, especially lifting in my garage. Like it's been a little bit of an adjustment for me because usually when I start to push those limits, I'll have a side spotter on either side as well as a back spotter. So I'll have 3 individuals watching that bar and safety rails. So that's just my mental game, like being a little bit weak there. Now I just have the safety rails and Tasha behind me. I mean, she's pretty strong, but like when you're looking at close to 700 pounds and if something just gets off a little bit, you know, it's like,
it could be a rough.
Is she going to be able to help? Like,
yeah. We don't want to see you on one of those Army fails videos, Dan.
Yeah, for sure. So,
oh man.
Yeah. I mean, that's huge. The mental game has got to be huge. And that's lifting in that environment. I mean, I know I'm in Iraq, so there's a lot of people that take heavier weights just by themselves. Closer to their max. They're tougher than me mentally. Yeah. But that's been an adjustment for me to take those bigger weights with just one spotter behind me. Right. Versus having, you know, being that much more spoiled by having 3.
You feel like you can take deeper reps and more reps.
Oh, for sure.
There's more. Yeah.
Yeah. You push it that much closer, right? Because if you get into trouble, you have 3 people there to help lift the weight up versus 1, which there's nothing wrong with 1, but it's like at some of those weights, it's still a significant amount of weight. Totally. Even with 3, but odds are you'll be okay in that situation, right? Yeah.
Distributed throughout the 3. It's super interesting. So we sort of talked about the bands, and I mean, these have been just so amazing, Dan. I'm so glad you introduced these to me because I use these for the band pull-aparts, warming up. You know, I just got into archery. So like I because it is like a 70-pound draw, and doing that, some people who are proficient archery hunters or archery people will be like, oh, 70 pounds, that's nothing. But you know, when you're kind of new to it, it was always nice to warm up. So I always have the band there when I'm warming up or doing other things. So I bring these when I travel. Like these are amazing, but also they add just that other variable when you're lifting weights, right? So when the home gym, you don't have all the machines. So you're like, okay, well, I have a bench press, I have a squat rack. How can I vary things? The chains and the bands, I haven't invested chains yet, but we kind of talked about the accommodating resistance a little bit with bands, but like there's so many different things you can do with this, you know, from double banding to single banding to hanging kettlebells for the instability. Like, dude, it's like sky's the limit, right?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So we talked about those subtle variations. Like this would be one great example of how you can really just have a subtle variation on one of those like main lifts. So say if you are bench pressing, suspending kettlebells, or it can be plates too, or any kind of weight that you can, you know, loop around. Suspending that is going to add that much more instability. So you have to be that much better in terms of stabilizing that load, and it's within a very similar pattern. So it's going to carry over well when you go back to regular weight. Bands are probably the easiest, like very portable and cheapest options that you could get that are very versatile. Like you said, you could just throw them in your bag, travel with them. That's one of the issues, like when we went into like quarantine, right? Is everybody's doing body weight workouts. How do you do body weight back if you don't have something to pull?
It's tough.
So bands are going to be a solution to that, right? You could do those band pull aparts. You can stand on it and row from there. You can set it up in certain ways to do face pulls if you can anchor it. So it's a huge, cheap investment that can just, like you said, opportunities are endless in what you can do, all the applications. Yeah, for sure.
It's awesome. I mean, this has been just like the most value. I've gotten just so much value from that. And then I loved using the chains, you know, at the gym. And you can use those for so many different things, but maybe let's talk about, are the chains more of a strength thing or can they be used for hypertrophy too?
Yeah, so they can be used for either, right? So when we look at what do they do? So chains and bands are both generally used as accommodating resistance primarily. So like we talked about, they can be used for stability too. So the accommodating resistance, what they do is basically they change that strength curve to give you a little bit more load to where your mechanical advantage or to where the weight would be lighter, it is now not. So you can therefore lift heavier weight throughout the range of motion, right? So it's going to offload where you're weakest and load up where you're strongest. So for hypertrophy, that's great. You know, it's going to keep that muscle engaged for that much longer. And if we look at it from a stability aspect too, you're going to work your stabilizers that much harder. So if you did that like kettlebell suspended bench press, all of your stabilizers, like your pecs, your shoulders, everything's going to be working that much harder, right? You can't necessarily load up quite as heavy, but that's okay. It's a different stimulus. So we look at changing that stimulus, going back to our original point with the periodization. Having those subtle variations can be huge, both for hypertrophy and for strength. I know a lot of individuals, bodybuilders, like to add bands to like leg press. It's kind of the same idea, right? Yeah. So at a leg press, at the top of the leg press, it's not super difficult, right? You could stand there with quite a bit of weight on there, but when you add bands on there, it's actively pulling back down. So the bands are a little bit more unique than the chain, that the band actually provides an overloaded eccentric. So it's trying to snap right back down like a slingshot. So a little bit harsher than gravity alone. Yeah. The chains are kind of that bridge in between the bands and free weight. So chains just get acted on by gravity, but they can do that same thing to where they unload where you're weakest and then load up where you're strongest. So it works for both. Another huge factor for that is power development too. So with that demand of increasing the weight as you get stronger, that's going to beg it like you to put more force into the movement. So you have to overcome that greater force, therefore accelerating that much faster. So you have to beat or chase basically the sticking point there by going faster. So with that overspeed eccentric, that also adds more kinetic energy, pulling you down. You're going to have a more aggressive reversal in that strength movement, that you're going to probably have a better bar speed hammering that from basically the bottom of the lift to the top because you're hammering that. It will slow you down though naturally. So this is kind of a side note here with power, but power can be developed with a wide range of intensities. So if we look at how we develop power with light weights, the intent is the most important thing. We want to move that weight fast, or we want to move our bodies fast. So when we do that with a bar on your back or a bar in your hands, if we're using a weight that's say less than maybe 40 or 50%, and we accelerate it as fast as we possibly can and continue to accelerate it all the way through, remember, we're strongest at the end range of motion. So we're going to naturally have to decelerate or let go of that bar and let it fly, right? So we do a throw, which becomes a ballistic. So having bands and chains will allow you to accelerate for longer during that range of motion, where we can have that maximal intent to be fast and be violent with the exercise that will have that much more of an impact in developing power.
Makes sense. That's cool. Yeah, because you're pushing all the way. That I can visualize bench pressing with chains. Like you start to slow down at the top after your triceps sort of clear that strength curve. But if you had chains, like you're going all the way to the very end. Yeah,
same for sure.
Squatting too.
So you're straining for that much longer, right? It's going to change where that sticking point is, or maybe prolong it, which is not a bad thing when we're trying to get stronger, right? So yeah, it makes it more difficult for a larger portion of the range of motion.
That's awesome. So I know, is it Elite FTS? They sell chains, but can you buy them at Home Depot, or do they not make the thick enough ones that you want?
Yeah. So generally speaking, you're looking for about 3/4 inch, or 5/8. So 5/8 are going to be roughly about 18 to 20 pounds in about 5 foot or 6 foot chunks. The reason you want that range is because you want to stack them so they're folded in half. I have a video too that we can link on my YouTube, which is how to set these up.
Sweet.
So you want them folded in half so that they stack on the ground and mostly unload. So if you hooked it from the strand, say like one end to the bottom, right? So we have the end of the strand on the top of the rack or top of the barbell, and then the other strand is on the ground. We're not going to get that much of a change in weight. Most of the weight's going to be suspended in the air the whole time. So yeah, you do want a chain with a significant amount of weight, or at least some significant amount of weight on it that you can fold over, so you get that contrast from the bottom to the top. I see. So yeah, Elite FTS sells chains. There's definitely some other retailers online that do. Home Depot generally won't have, or any of your home improvement stores won't necessarily have heavy enough. You can use a lot of lighter chains for sure.
So
but
just a cluster probably.
Yeah, it's
Stuff
just
all over the
more to
place.
deal with, right? So I would recommend ordering some online that are probably the 5/8 inch, and that's the diameter that you're looking for, in 5 or 6 foot cut segments. And that's usually what they're sold as.
And then for the home gym, do you like to, I know Rogue and all, they have accessories where you can hang that. Do you just recommend looping them over the bar, or do you like to get the accessory that hangs it like a little carabiner?
Yeah, so that's where you can get from Home Depot actually. So the idea is you want a leader. So like a leader chain or a leader strap. So this is going to be something that weighs is pretty light but strong. So that can be a lighter chain that you would basically loop that over the bar, and that would be pretty close to hitting the floor. And then you would attach your heavier chains to the bottom of that.
Got it. Okay.
Fold it in half. The ones that, you see in the gym sometimes, they're going to be the straps with like rings attached to it. That's the same idea, but just way more convenient.
Yeah. Right. So you have to deal with all these chains. That's cool.
Yeah. So
realize.
those are definitely worthwhile. Then when you price it all together, it ends up being cheaper to get the straps anyway.
Really? Okay.
And trying to build your own chains with like good carabiners and a strong enough chain. Like, I would just get the straps to begin with.
That's cool.
Ones on Elite FDS are really good.
Yeah. Okay. I'll check it out. I haven't done that for our home gym. I mean, I should. I just got, invested in and want to finish off on other things. But I mean, just guys, don't underestimate the power of bands and chains. It's just, especially if you're short on cash for equipment, like that could really enable so much more variety. Now we're seeing, and maybe I'm not going to describe this right, but flywheels, like these are coming out. Kabuki just came out with it. Is it at the Catmos, or what is it called?
Kratos, I think. Yeah.
So where do you see this going?
Those are pretty interesting. So they could be pretty versatile too. Like I like what they did with theirs. It's a larger platform. The more, I guess, the original product that I think of that uses this technology is a K-Box. So it's kind of similar to a regard of like a rowing machine a little bit, or an assault bike, to where the harder you pull or push or move that flywheel, that implement, that handle, the harder it's going to pull back on you. So theoretically, you could put a ton of force into that thing and it's going to rip it right back down. So you got to be ready for that. I got to do a little bit more research in terms of like how that applies to strength and how that applies to hypertrophy and all that. But it's a pretty cool concept that's at least we're seeing fairly new in terms of the marketplace. I mean, K-Box has been around for a little while, but now we're seeing different products that are utilizing that similar technology or that concept. So I don't know a ton about that, but I'm very curious to learn more.
I mean, they build such great products, the Buffalo bar, and then the Cadillac bar, and all the bars they build, and it's built right here in the Northwest in Portland, Kabuki Strength. And I've watched it, like I'm on the fence about getting it, but it looks really cool. And that's one of the things, like if you're short on space, if you want to invest under $2,000 in something for the home gym, especially for accessories and stuff, because you can move, you can either, it fits on a rack, on a 3-inch rack, any Rogue rack or a Titan Fitness or whatever, or you can bolt it to your wall. And then this carabiner, it goes out. I mean, you can do anything. You can do back, you can do arms, you can do pulls, you can do belt squats, front belt squat. I was like, wow, this is cool.
No, definitely.
I was pretty impressed with that, and it seems they build such great products. So I'd imagine it's good technology and all that. I mean,
yeah, definitely. I haven't gotten my hands on it yet, but I'm definitely curious to. I want to.
That's cool. Well, Dan, I mean, we could talk for days about all sorts of stuff. I really, really appreciate you coming on and sharing your knowledge, and I've learned so much from you over the years, which has been great. If folks want to connect with you, or are you still taking on clients?
Yeah. So I'm currently working with some online clients, or have some spots for online training. Yep. I've also just put together a program that is on Train Heroic, which is an app to where it will actually track all of your data, which is fantastic. And it delivers it with a video and then my coaching cues on there. So I'll write up what to do, specifically the sets, the reps, the rest. So you'll have your whole plan delivered right to your phone, or your device. So that's on sale, and that's more of a returning to gym product right now. So it's called the Strong Start program.
Cool.
So that's, kind of set up to be for people who maybe were lifting and then got sidelined, right, with everything that's happened in the past year or year and a half now. So that, or if like you're coming back from maybe an injury, you just got cleared, it can work for beginner. It might be a little bit more accelerated for most beginners. So you might just add in or repeat a week or two in there, and extend those a little bit longer. Maybe run it twice for a beginner too. So it could also work for a novice. I would say with a little bit of experience, it's probably going to be better suited though, especially without having a coach there. But yeah, I do online coaching.
That's awesome.
And that's very individualized. So based on what you have equipment wise, like I develop a plan with you and your schedule. And then the feedback is, this is through a similar app, actually True Coach. So you give me feedback on each workout, each exercise, whether it be video, written, or all of the above, and I'll give you feedback, and we'll just basically figure out your training from there.
That's cool.
So yeah, it's been fun. I mean, really, the pandemic pushed the whole market into that, right? So I had been doing it before, like you had mentioned, with a lot of the trainers too, even at the gym that I was at. But yeah, it's been great. It's been fun for sure doing that. So yeah, if you want to find me, my Instagram is at Ideal Strength. I also have idealstrength.com where you can learn more and contact and sign up for a newsletter. Sweet. Where I'm going to be, basically sending out everything that we're doing, updates, program-wise, and when we release more. I know Tasha's also working on some programs too.
Sweet, man. That's really great. Yeah, I'll definitely put that in the show notes in the description below, friends. So definitely check that out. And last thing, I just, if we have a few more minutes, Dan, if you're cool, we didn't talk about kettlebells. Kettlebells are pretty hot. There's like kettlebell certification courses now, like people are getting into it because I think they're kind of overrated in one sense. Like, oh, it's just, this is all you need. Just like 3 kettlebells. There's more, I think, to fitness than that. But the importance of like joint stacking and moving multiple joints in one sort of, what do you think about that idea?
Yeah, so this is something I think the fitness industry as a whole does often, where we start to become very dogmatic in our approach. So kettlebells, I think, are great. They're a fantastic tool, but realizing that they are one of many tools that we can use. So I do think they're great. I've got a set of my own, pairs basically up to 32 kilogram from 12. And I think, they're fantastic to do, again, like we've been talking about, subtle variations. So if you're doing a press, having a kettlebell stacked on your wrist versus a dumbbell, it loads a little bit different. The resistance profile is a little bit different. We could also look at maybe doing bottoms up, which I'm a huge fan of doing bottoms up. So if you're holding that kettlebell upside down, it's going to teach you to stack your joints. So like you're talking about, with having the proper alignment with your grip strength has to be there. Your wrists have to be stacked, and the wrists have to be stacked under the elbow. So if any of that is off, it's very self-limiting. That bell, if it's heavy enough, is just going to fall, right? And nobody wants to do that. So you can only go as heavy as you can stabilize. So that's a great way to get the intrinsic stabilizers of the shoulder to fire, like your rotator cuff. It's also just a different stimulus to train. So if you start to build basically that strength or the stability, then when you move on to maybe dumbbells or a barbell, you might be that much more prepared because you have proper joint centration. Everything's lining up. You have a better line of force that you can stack through your body basically and back into the bell or the implement or the tool. So I do think they are a versatile tool. Just doing a kettlebell swing can also be very metabolic in terms of getting your heart rate just jacked through the roof. It doesn't take up a lot of space. It can also work on strength endurance. It could also be a great one for power. We can stack it with a band too and do banded kettlebell swings where it's going to pull back down like a power bomb basically, and then you have that overspeed eccentric as well. So it's great for developing power as well. So they're definitely versatile. They're sometimes can be a bit overrated, right? Where you get the schools of thought of like, I'm a kettlebell trainer and this is what I use like 100% of the time. So that dogmatic approach, in my opinion, can be, a bit detrimental because you're just limiting your toolbox. Yeah. So it is a very valuable tool for sure, but Yeah, it's not the end all be all for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I get it. We find what works for us and we get excited about it and we want to tell the world and all that. But I like your approach where you're like, it's one tool. You know, you can't do everything with a hammer, right? Sometimes you need a skill saw or whatever. So, but I found just, you know, using like just doing Turkish get-ups and stuff with like as a warm-up has been really great. Cause like, it's like, all right, well, how can I get sick of, especially in the summer, I'll lay a towel down there, I'll warm up. And then if on a day where, like you said, more metabolic or stuff like in between, I'll do some Turkish get-ups lightly or just go halfway. And it's been pretty cool for just like prehab for the shoulder, some things. So it's like, it's cool that it's there. It's something, but if that's all you have, then start looking at bands or other equipment, I think. Cause like you said, you're
sure
limiting yourself a little bit.
Yeah. The big part with the kettlebells is like, you know, it's only so much weight too. Yeah. So unless you just keep stacking up the bigger and bigger bells, like, and then it starts to become pretty dangerous swinging a heavy weight. You can create a lot of force with
200-pound kettlebell or whatever, right?
Yeah. Right. Yeah. That one that was in the gym. I mean, I don't remember the actual study, but I've read this somewhere that the amount of force that somebody was able to produce swinging a 24 kilogram kettlebell is equivalent to a 500-pound deadlift.
Whoa.
Right. So there is some carryover in terms of using a light weight. But when we talk about periodization and developing power and training some different stimuluses, that is one stimulus or one type of load. So we are working more in like speed strength or strength speed, somewhere along that line, depending on the weight of the bell or the tool. So we are not getting, I guess with that study, it doesn't say that you're necessarily prepared to pick up 500 pounds if you can produce that on a kettlebell that weighs 54 pounds or 53 pounds, right? So that is one thing is like, yeah, we want to have a more variety of loading so that we have that tissue tolerance or that preparedness to do what we want to do, right? So that can fill, you know, the purpose or the void, I guess, of it's better than nothing, better than body weight for sure, right? So you could do quite a bit with it, but yeah, it'd be great to get your hands on maybe some heavier loads at some time so that we can vary that stimulus and continue to force adaptation. Right. So it doesn't become stale or stagnant.
Yeah,
for sure.
That's a great point. When the whole pandemic happened, there was minimal equipment and we had like one kettlebell. Deanna had like a 15 pounder. It was like plastic. And some lady who was a fireman was selling all her stuff. And I was like, here's $200. What can I get? And she was like, well, I have a pair of these 16 kilogram, 22. I went up to, I can't remember. So now we have 190 some odd pound. And I'll use that for sort of the goblet deadlift. Is that the way to talk about it? Not a goblet, but just a kettlebell deadlift.
Oh, yeah. So just picking it up from the ground?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just, to finish it for the hips, we talked about that in Power Hour and yeah, sometimes I'll put a band on it and do some swings, but yeah, it's been kind of fun. Been a cool tool. If the whole pandemic thing didn't happen, I probably wouldn't have invested the time to learn about it. So there's some perks there, I guess,
For sure. Yeah. I would actually say like with that, the kettlebell deadlift, like that's a great way to teach the deadlift in general. So with that program that I was talking about earlier, that Strong Start program, that's how we start with it. So nice. Starting with goblet squat. So holding a kettlebell or a dumbbell out in front, because that anterior load, it feels that much harder, right? So you can get a relatively hard exercise with a lighter load. So it's really about where that load is placed. Now, when we look at teaching the deadlift and having a kettlebell in between your center of mass or in between your legs, that's a great way to learn how to pick up something from the ground, as opposed to a barbell, which kind of forces it to be a bit more anterior because your shins will hit it.
Yeah.
So it's a great way for beginners to learn how to deadlift as well. Looking at that, or maybe a trap bar. Trap bars can be heavy because they weigh about 45 pounds empty, and then you got to put plates on them to elevate them, right? So a kettlebell is usually the way that we start to build that hip hinge pattern.
That's awesome.
So that deadlift pattern for sure.
That's cool. Dan, really, really appreciate you coming on the show. I have those idealstrength.com, and I'll put links to your different programs, which is great for people to start out. Because it's hard if everyone wants to get fit and like, well, where do I go? And now I'll just recommend, those two programs because otherwise, there's like all these cookie cutter websites, livestrong.com and just some weird stuff. So it's nice to know like someone who has a really good foundation that's integrating all these different facets of fitness and strength together. And you put that together, man. So congrats on that.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for having me. I appreciate you having me out.
Appreciate coming on, my man.
Yeah, for sure.